The Athletic ranked the Winnipeg Jets under 23 prospect pool 28th in the NHL. Is it really that bad, or are there signs of improvement?
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for joining us on tonight's episode. The Jets aren't even doing anything, and somehow they are still part of the talk of the national media. The NHL top prospect pool rankings came out from Corey Pronman, and the Jets ranked 28th out of 32 teams. Now, I'll say this as a preface: Pronman's way of evaluating prospects has always been very tools heavy, and there tends to be very clear tiers of ability and skill for him. That makes a lot of his takes kind of controversial. You have to respect it a little bit because he's always consistent with that kind of stuff, but I also think it does make some of the prospect rankings individually something that I don't always agree with. Elias Salomonson being a third pair guy, for instance, not really something that I would put much stock into whatsoever. I clearly see him as a top 4 guy. But, is it wrong that the Jets prospect pool is towards the back of the league? I want to talk through that, as well as Murat Atesh, also from The Athletic, putting out an article about the next 3 years for the Jets not looking super ideal. And we'll talk about what the team can do to try and work around it, as well as what exactly the Jets think they might be returning to. Because if they're just trying to get back to baseline did not lead to playoff success. And I want to talk through that as well. But first, 32 teams out there, and the Jets rank 28th on the prospect pool. Now, Pronman tends to really like having elite franchise talents. So does everyone, right? We love having top prospects. That's why Viggo Bjork is one of the most exciting guys we've ever seen in a Jets prospect draft. But as far as the rest of the Jets pool is concerned, it's a little hard to argue right now that Winnipeg's pool is that much higher than 28. I'd still probably put it a few spots above, although, how many teams could I realistically say they're better than? Not many. And I think that's a very hard thing to reconcile. The Jets have generally picked towards the middle of most rounds, even when they've had first rounders. They've usually spent first rounders on competitive runs. And one thing that, came up on Jets at noon, either earlier today or maybe it was yesterday, they were talking about, whether you would exchange the Jets having picks for all of their playoff runs. And on the one hand, I agree with the assessment that the mentality of trying to win a Stanley Cup the last several years is good. But you look at who the Jets traded for and how many of those players actually moved the needle for Winnipeg. Monahan and Toffoli were probably some of the bigger acquisitions, and those guys ended up not really panning out because, well, the concern was that they would be a little too slow, and that was a huge problem in the series against, who was it, Colorado? So you think back to that, you think back to the President's Trophy season when their 2 acquisitions were Luke Schenn and Brandon Tanev. That's not a commitment to winning. That is adding some depth that actually made the team worse. Luke was unfortunately not capable of keeping up at the NHL level and speed. Tanev was fine as like a fourth liner, but the Jets needed a really big difference maker, and kind of getting cucked on the Brock Nelson thing really crippled the team in a bad way. And so, the President's Trophy year, it was the time to spend assets, but you look at who the Jets acquired with those assets, didn't really seem like a particularly great use of expended draft picks and stuff. Those were 2 seconds that the team gave up, and I think there was one other tertiary pick, maybe like a 4th rounder or something, involved in one of those deals. So all that to say, I would feel differently if the Jets were consistently able to punch above their weight and grab some big talents. But when they've spent, they've really not gotten great returns. I think the Monahan and Toffoli deals were fine in retrospect, and I think the price the Jets paid was very fair. I think, you could argue that they got a pretty decent deal, all things told. But neither of those guys were really that good once the playoffs came around. And that's kind of the big bugbear for the Jets. Winnipeg has needed, some real talent to try and boost this team in the postseason. And it's why I want to talk about what exactly the team is trying to return to at the end of the episode, because if they intend to try and be competitive, running it back just doesn't do it. It'll maybe get you to a wild card or even a playoff spot, but beyond that, you are not really looking at a particularly relevant team in the playoff picture. And that's just the honest to goodness truth. But, the Jets prospect pool being 30 or 28th out of 32, that's really rough for the future. The team, again, would I say that they're 28th, almost dead last? No, I would probably have them a couple spots higher. But again, I'm a homer. I'm a biased person. I love some of the Jets picks and prospects. I think some of the newer selections I'm higher on than I was some of the older draft picks. The Hees and the Waltons versus the Barlows of the world. These guys, I think, legitimately have a chance of playing some really solid NHL games. But, it's hard to say that the Jets have many difference makers. You've got Bjork, you've got Salamanson, and past that, how many prospects would you really put a lot of faith in to be top end guys? I mean, Boumediene has a chance. Frey might be a really solid top four. Jaeger looks like he's a really solid middle six, but you're just not really seeing a lot of star talent, and that's because the Jets just aren't drafting where you tend to get them. Yeah, you kind of make the exchange of being a more middle of the pack team to potentially, in the Jets' case, very good in the regular season, but not really good in the playoffs. Well, you're stuck with, back third of the first round kinds of picks if you even have them, and we know the Jets have traded a number of them over the years to try and win now. That leaves you with not a lot of meat on the bones. And I think that's kind of the sum takeaway. You can argue with the rankings and the way that Pronman evaluates things, but I think his end conclusion is right. The Jets pool isn't that great. And for a team that is, staring down the barrel of a bunch of mid-30s guys who are probably towards the back portions of their careers, that puts you in a really, really tough spot, especially if you are not intending to start to tear things down and rebuild. And we know how the Jets are. They hate the R word. It is like their least favorite thought process and discussion point ever. But I know internally there have to be conversations privately about how long they can keep this thing going. They've gotten a lot of regular season returns out of this group. You got a President's Trophy. You've had lots of playoff appearances. But again, the results past that leave a lot to be desired. And they're going to continue to decline as the team gets older and older, and not a lot backfills those spots where the Jets just don't have enough to really raise the ceiling. There's only a couple of ways to big talents these days, right? Either you kind of handicap yourself with massive free agent expenditures, not an option for the Jets. You look to make big trades, potentially an option for the Jets. You need to target guys who don't have trade clauses, and that tends to be expensive, right? Especially if you're going for younger guys. Again, not really an option with the assets the Jets have, but it's more doable than free agent signings. Door number 3 is you're just going to have to try and hope that you end up with a couple of lottery picks. It's the suckiest road. It's the least fun, but it's probably the one that's going to have to happen over time for the Jets to really rebuild out this pool and start to build that next core. Bjork helps a lot. He is, to me, a lottery level talent, but past that, he needs support. There has to be more to start to fill in those spots as the guys who are, 33, 34 start to move on. And I think that's going to ask some very big questions of where the vets see themselves over the next few years. That Morrissey interview with The Athletic, which I'd encourage you to read, had some very interesting implications about the Jets vets maybe thinking about the next stages of their career, and it's not just Hellebuck. So be sure to give that a read. But speaking of The Athletic, Murat Atesh also had kind of like a 3-year projection, and I want to summarize some of the bigger concerns with it as we start to move into this next phase of Jets hockey. We'll talk about all of that coming right up. Locked on Winnipeg Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shots with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. If you think Pete Alonso is going to help the Orioles finally scrap out some sort of a playoff relevant run, this is your chance to cash in on some of his big opposite field home runs. Or maybe you think Guerrero Jr. is going to be the guy who can help the Jays make a playoff run despite having had a tough regular season. Maybe it's just around the corner, that turnaround you've been hoping for, where you can call his next home run. So, are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show. We are talking a little bit about some of the articles that have been coming out about the Jets recently. The Athletic has a lot of thoughts about Winnipeg lately. And, the Jets are just kind of in a weird spot, right? And we knew that this was going to happen eventually. I've talked a lot about it over the last several years. Eventually, the bill does kind of come due. And I think that's where Winnipeg is in a tricky position. Not a lot of avenues to try and improve the team. And the 3-year picture, as of right now, does not look great. Murat Atesh tried to break some stuff down for Jets fans. And you can find his article talking through the next several seasons about the Jets depth chart, about the prospects that fill in, what the team looks like. And, there's a lot of assumptions about who stays and who goes. The long and short of it is the Jets are just looking like a pretty rough team. And, there's not a lot of internal help coming. Brad Lambert, guys of his ilk are probably your best current hopes for some sort of short-term depth fills. And listen, as much as I like guys like Lambert and stuff, I also have very limited expectations of what these players will do for the Jets without more evidence to go off of, right? And Winnipeg hasn't really had many seasons where they felt comfortable letting kids use the depth spots. They've signed lots of veterans, they've traded for them, they've backfilled, and now they're at a point where they don't really have that many other choices. At some point, they're going to have to kind of cut some of the veterans and put kids in because the youth are not getting a chance to actually make their mark in the NHL and help this team raise whatever ceiling is left. And you're in a position where now you're forced to figure out if they can actually be helpful, all while your star goalie is reading the tea leaves and is looking for the exit. This puts a lot of stress on this team. And I think it's why, how I've looked at this offseason and this particular summer is the Jets have actually done exactly what they needed to do to prepare themselves for the future. I've said this before. I think if the Jets tried to do the win now thing, they would end up screwing themselves terribly. There was a suggestion from Sean Reynolds at the end of the season that when Winnipeg kind of missed the initial lottery pick, there were some clenched, smiles, right? People were not happy internally because they needed that pick. They still got a lottery level talent out of 8th overall. So in the end, it did kind of work out. But I think the bigger storyline here is that there are folks in Winnipeg that see where this road is going. But I don't know if I look at the Jets front office and some of the key leadership on this team and see that same storyline. You hear about how the team still intends to win games, how they still want to win now. And that's all well and good. But how do you intend to do that? What is your plan for it? If it's this that we've seen this summer, good luck, bro. You are going to have a very uphill battle. And for everyone who will come in here and say it's just injuries and this team will get back to what it's always done before, yeah, you have 4 playoff rounds of wins in like the last 7, 8, 9 years. That's really what you want to go back to? Okay. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just think, what is it that people are satisfied with? Are they happy with the Jets being a little brother in the NHL? Or do they want this team to truly be a relevant playoff force? There is absolutely a path to doing that, but it is a very hard one now. And the longer that the Jets try and do the halfway house option or keep running it back, they are only making the task ahead of them even harder. Truth be told, I'm just kind of at a loss now as we start to get closer and closer to the season. The team is pretty quiet about their plans for the year. They've announced promo schedules. They've kind of done ticket pushes and all that. But in terms of what they're actually looking to do this year, other than just win games, there's really not been a lot of conversation, and especially for what happens after the season. You know, the contracts of Morrissey, Sandberg, players like that, those are running down. The Jets just extended Scheifele, Hellebuck, and Connor to what end, though? And this is where you start to see some of these really big exits. Next 3 years, if this lineup really doesn't get many boosts, especially from lottery picks that can join the team now, you're in a really tough spot because, again, most of the prospect pool that the Jets have available is not going to fill many of the top spots. Winnipeg is still going to be down, most likely a top six winger from the Ehlers thing. You're still going to need another middle six winger or center. You're still probably going to need another top four defenseman because Lord knows Pionk and Bello on the right side are starting to age out. And we don't know if Morrissey and Sandberg are both going to be here after their contracts end. I don't think that there's any sort of guarantee of that as of right now. The team is increasingly being backed into a corner. And I think, the 3-year projection from Marat really showed how little they have available to them to try and get out of this. The Jets picks are going to have to be ones that they make. If they trade away draft assets, you had better be sure that what you're getting in return is something that can be a part of this team for many years to come. And guys like that just don't often get moved, not to a team like the Jets. So I think Winnipeg is increasingly finding itself staring down an inevitable fate. And I just wonder if the team itself is aware of that. I know for a fact, because I have working eyes, and I think everyone else does, there are people in the Jets organization who I'm sure know what's coming. They can see it. They've probably even suggested that things are heading in a direction where the team is going to have to make some really hard choices. But so far, at least on the very top level, we're not seeing a shift in the thought process about how to prepare for the future. The team still talks about winning now like that is the best goal. And I get it. I know that is always going to be how they approach things. But unless this team actually makes some big acquisitions, how the heck do you plan to win now? You're going to run it back with this group, with more young kids that are generally unproven and probably not good enough to help the team this year. Okay. Why didn't we try stuff like this earlier? You made a lot of choices with who you brought in, the veteran free agents that you signed, the players that you traded for, and pretty much none of them really worked out. So now you're forced to make this move, and you don't really have much to go off of if plan A fails. There is no plan B or C or D. It's plan A or bust with this team, and that's kind of been how it's been for a long time. So far, it has generally been more of a bust than it has been a big success. They're still making their revenue. They're still getting the occasional playoff gate sales, but increasingly, I just wonder how long they can keep this thing going. That 3-year window that Marat projected was just flat out grim. I don't think that there's any other way to say it. You marry that with a prospect pool that some think is towards the back four of the NHL. I don't know what to do, man. I really don't. I think that's where we all should kind of be at, is there's not much the Jets can do. There's only one road ahead now. It's a very painful one. It's the one that the team is going to do everything it possibly can to avoid. But even then, they haven't really done that much to stay away from it. If this team goes into the season like they're constructed right now, or perhaps even down Hellebuck, they're going to lose more games than they win. Potentially, right? That is a real possibility. Stuart Skinner and whoever else in net is going to be a clear step back. And even if the Jets get some roster upgrades up front or on the back end, those guys might not be enough to help with the save percentage issues that we might see. That and the Jets scoring offense is still probably going to be mediocre at best overall. So this year really feels like this could be when that bill that we've been waiting for to come due actually hits. And it might not really require injuries to be that thing. But what I hope the Jets take away from this is an eye towards the future. This team needs to be thinking about the much longer term, because a desire and an idea to return to what the Jets have already accomplished doesn't actually get you more playoff games. I want to talk about that coming right up in just a bit. Hey, friends, and welcome to these closing thoughts of tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as we are chatting a little bit about this idea that the Jets are going to go back to being a truly great team. And I just ask if we've all watched the same Jets team, because the regular season has been fine, right? That's not really where the concern has generally been with the Jets. Their regular seasons, they're usually qualifying for the playoffs. That's never the problem. What happens in the playoffs continues to be the thing that haunts Winnipeg time and time again. It's why their reputation with a lot of players is probably in the tubes right now. You know, on the one hand, you've got the geographic situation, but on the other hand, the Jets haven't actually built a winner since 2017-18. You had a couple of years after that where the Jets did look decent, but you look at how many playoff rounds they've won. They've got 4 total, and their best run recently was the President's Trophy year, where they basically won like 6 total playoff games between the Blues and the Stars. Winnipeg had like 6 playoff wins. That is not good enough for a team that thinks it is a competitive squad. The Jets are not, and that has been the narrative in the postseason for years. So when I see people talking about this idea that the Jets are going to bounce back, they're going to go back to being great again, I don't understand. Are they going to be good for like a playoff run, or are they going to be good for the regular season? Because there is a very clear distinction between the two, and there has always been that. I've talked about it year after year after year after year. Like, it is beating a dead horse, right? And yet it just doesn't seem to sink in with a lot of folks that Winnipeg is a team that can only reach a certain summit. They can get up the side of the mountain a little bit, but once they hit and start getting into the final third, the ascent to the top of the peak, they hit a ceiling. And past that, there has never been a team since that 17-18 squad that has been able to get near it. That 17-18 team was truly one of the best NHL teams to not win a cup. They were the Florida Panthers, the Tampa Bay Lightning. They were the Vegas Golden Knights. They were that scary. That team had it all. And unfortunately, they ran into a hot goalie, and that kind of torpedoed their hopes. You look at what the Jets have assembled since then, and the team has not come close to being anything on that level. And it doesn't seem like the front office knows how to do it. So I think this idea that the Jets should focus on returning to what they've done the last several years is it's a delusional run. It puts you at risk of even worse things. And honestly, maybe this is the way to get some of those lottery picks. If you keep going back to the same well that has failed you multiple times, maybe that's going to be enough for the Jets to come away with some big top young talents. I don't mean to be negative here, but this is just the situation that the Jets increasingly find themselves in, especially with how the summer has gone and the longer-term picture that kind of faces the squad. Again, I said it before, this sets them up much better for the future than it does the present. But the team still believes it is a playoff contender. It still thinks that there is a chance the team can go on some kind of a run, and they don't even know if their goalie is going to be there for it. So, what are we even talking about here? It wasn't injuries and a crap roster last year that completely sank the Jets. It was all of it, right? The crap roster was not good even before the injuries hit, and the injuries just made everything worse. Expecting Taves to be a top 6 or middle 6 center was a joke, right? Like Jonathan did the best he possibly could, and he was more of a 4th line center. His hands still worked, the feet did not. And it was clear that the overall level of play that he was able to put out just wasn't at the pace of the NHL. No one was shocked by this because he had been off the ice for 2 years after recovering from long COVID. Of course it was going to be an uphill battle. No one should have been surprised by that. But the Jets had no other solution to their middle 6 and top 6 center problems than to hope that Taves could turn the clock back by like a decade. And then you look at how the Jets approached some of the other free agent signings. Goose Nyquist really didn't do much of anything, 1 goal in the whole year, and was kind of like a healthy scratch half the time. You had Tanner Pearson, who stuck around for 30, 40 games and was really a non-factor for the most part. Cole Koepke is the best of the whole bunch, and he is a 4th liner, and that's just where the Jets are. And so this idea that the team is going to return to some level of play, some elite team, I think the best that you could hope for is that their power play is very good and their PK and defense are good. And I just don't know how much that actually gets you once you reach the playoffs. You have to be a team that creates at 5v5, and the Jets have not been that for like 7 or 8 years. They can kind of look the part at times. They can even outplay some teams. But when it comes to doing it consistently against top level talent in the postseason, that has been an Achilles heel. And that is not going to change without structural changes to the Jets. We heard them talk at the start of the summer about a tip-to-toe analysis of what went wrong. How much has actually changed in the months since then? We had a successful draft. We really haven't seen much else. The Moose staff remains the same. The general development and scouting department appears to be the same. So what has realistically changed? We had rumors of a Shane Doan hiring that fell through. We have not really seen much of anything else. There may be stuff happening on the back end, but the team is certainly not talking about it, and no one seems to be aware of any changes that the Jets have actually made beyond the basics. And so here, I just wonder, coming into a really pivotal season where your franchise superstar still wants out, your other veteran stars might be thinking more about their future than they were originally. You don't have any answers for how to win in the postseason, and you want to go back to just being the regular season team you were before. That is not good enough. Not for an NHL team that's still worth over $1 billion. This franchise shouldn't see itself as some small chihuahua. This team has been one of the best teams in the NHL over, many seasons, especially with the 2017-2018 team. That, for me, was the peak. That team really should have gone even further than it did. It's a shame that it ended so tragically. It could have been a year that, ended in one of the best victories this core deserved. But unfortunately, the team just fell short. And now it's up to a front office that doesn't want to admit it's where it's at to try and rebuild and pull together a new core. And they're not going to try to rebuild either. They're going to try and keep doing the halfway house until someone forces their hand. So all I can say is this could be a rocky next few seasons. The Jets really think that they can resist the tides of change in time. That has never worked out for the teams that try to. Would love to be proven wrong, but this Jets team is on a one-way course with some big draft picks, and that, more than anything, is what the team is truly going to need. Would love to hear your thoughts, though, on the summer so far and some of the articles presented. Let me know if you're kind of feeling in the same position that I'm at with this team. Would love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the YouTube comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.